Roger Ebert called it better than it needs to be. Let's talk about 30 Days of Night.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Daniel, do you want to let the people know what we're here to discuss today?
So this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. We are also in October, so Halloween season is in full swing. And this week we are talking about 30 Days of Night, which is a 2007 vampire movie, which follows the story of the inhabitants of a small Alaskan town who are preparing for the annual 30 Days of Darkness due to how far up north they are. And this year, a pack of vampires is closing in on this town and using the 30 days of no sunshine to go after the inhabitants of this small town. And the story follows a small group of survivors as they try to survive the 30 days of darkness while hiding from the vampires. So I've seen 30 Days of Night a bunch of times over the years. I just randomly saw it one day and quite liked it. I just kept bumping into it and kept rewatching it every few years because I'm really into vampire movies. But in most vampire movies, the vampires are not real proper monsters, and this is one of the few where they actually are, and so that is one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite vampire movies. And however, you just saw this for the first time, right?
Yep, correct.
Having seen 30 Days of Night for the first time in 2025, what's your takeaway?
I am not a fan of this one, unfortunately. I think, one, the story played out in a way that I didn't really enjoy. I thought the whole 30 Days of Night would have a little bit more significance than what it ended up having for me anyways, in terms of how the story played out, how the threat developed throughout the movie, and the kind of survivor's journey. I don't think I liked the vampires in this either. I know that they were a little bit more savage and a little bit more kind of brutal in the way that they were killing everyone and going after people, but I don't know, it just seemed a little bit I don't want to say it's senseless, but I don't know. I know you mentioned there that you like vampires that are a little more bloody, a little more brutal, a little bit more savage. I think I have a bit of a preference for a little bit more of a suave vampire, the kind of cool vampire, your typical Dracula type vampire. The whole time I was watching it, they kind of just reminded me of zombies as opposed to vampires. And again, I think you've got a bit more of a deeper sort of knowledge on vampires, but based on what I've seen and in terms of different shows, different movies, etc., it was giving zombies as opposed to vampires throughout. And small group of survivors, I think part of the movie hinges on you kind of really enjoying the characters, and I don't think I found myself really enjoying the characters that much in this. I didn't connect with the characters. I didn't kind of connect with their motivations. You kind of are somewhat rooting for them a little bit, not that much. I think the movie kind of felt where I just didn't really care what happened to the characters, really truthfully. But I couldn't suspend my belief in certain situations as to how the survivors were still alive. And when things like that happen, I just kind of want the survivors to die because kind of going on real world logic of a movie logic, they should have died in certain situations. And it just annoys me when there isn't a clever way for them to get out of a situation, as opposed to the movie just allowing them to escape a situation that they were in. So I think overall, not a fan of this one. And maybe it caught me at the wrong time, but just kind of not really digging this one.
It's interesting because your impressions are the exact opposite of mine, almost. The ending is maybe not the strongest, and there's a few areas in there where their actual plan for survival is maybe not the most interesting. But there's a few things here where I was going to point to that as why the movie works so well. And then you come out and say, well, that's the part that doesn't work at all for you. So let's go through them. So first of all, I recommended this a few weeks ago for the Halloween schedule, and you had not heard of this at all, right?
I hadn't heard of it, no. When I first started watching it, I was like, it looked familiar in a sense, but then I quickly realized I hadn't watched it. But I don't know, it just kind of felt familiar for some type of reason at the start.
I do think it kind of has a 2000s look to it. It could be a CW show just based on how it looks in some places, right? Or how the actors look, or how they're dressed, or it's something, right? It kind of feels 2000s to me. But when you realized what this was, vampires in Alaska, did it make you feel anything?
I liked it. The whole premise of it and the whole setup of this part of the world is going to go dark for 30 days. And, vampires are, obviously historically, they can't come out in sunlight. I was like, okay, this is going to be a very interesting story. This is going to be like a very interesting development for, how the vampires are going to kind of like take over this particular town. Even when they were kind of like setting up things where, things are being sabotaged, like they've like taken all the phones, they're like destroying different parts of the town so that they can't, escape or communicate with the outside world and stuff like that. I was like, okay, like this is like an interesting setup. And the bit that I just didn't enjoy was how quick everything happened. I kind of thought that again, because this is like 30 Days of Night, I thought the progression of it would be a little bit slower. And I know that they're kind of plunged in darkness, so like it's kind of one extremely long night. At the end of the day, it's like essentially one really long night. But I just kind of thought that there would be like a slower takeover of the town. But it just kind of felt like the vampire showed up and the whole town kind of went to shit pretty much. And then we were just kind of like left with a few survivors.
Yeah, before we get to that, there was one more point I wanted to make, kind of lead into it, which is I absolutely hate it in movies when stuff doesn't matter, right? So we introduce a topic and then it doesn't matter to how the story unfolds or just to what's going on. And here, a whole bunch of things actually do matter. So the darkness matters, right? So because of, like you said, because of the location, the sun won't come up for 30 days, and that makes it a vampire's playground, right? There's the cold, which already surrounds them with death, and it turns everybody into a survivor, right? Like the entire town, like if you live in a small town in Alaska or anywhere like it, survival is on your mind, right? Like your entire life is based around understanding how dangerous your environment is and what you need to do to survive, right? And this is everything from the heat to the light to wild animals to the ice, right? This entire town is kind of people who are there. And like there's a one point when the sheriff Olson gives somebody a ticket for his vehicle not being in proper condition, and the guy says, "Aren't we all here because we want to be free? Like because we just want to do what we want to do? This is not a regular town. It shouldn't unfold the same way as a regular city, right?" There's like a scene when Olson realizes that something is up, right? He doesn't quite yet know it's vampires, but he realized that somebody is out there killing animals at this point, right? Like guard dogs and whatever. He tells anybody who has a generator, go home, turn on the generator, turn on all the lights, and load your guns. This is not a line you say to somebody who lives in New York or Chicago or London, right? Like this is what you say in a rural town. So I do think like who the characters are and how they behave and their mentality rhymes with this whole struggle for survival, because that is just how it is to live in like a place like small town Alaska, I think.
No, I agree for sure. I think they kind of, and like you said, some movies would kind of skip over some of those facts or like not emphasize some of those points, but it kind of like you said really drives home the mind state and the environment and the situation that kind of like everyone is in terms of kind of like being prepared for the worst and being prepared for all the ill situations, like having the backup generators for when there's an eventual power failure or like a grid failure on their end pretty much. So I appreciate all of that in the movie, but then I don't know why I just didn't find myself caring enough about. I don't, again, with some of these type of movies, is like when you're presenting something that's in the real world but a little bit more foreign than the environment that you're particularly used to. I feel like it should kind of half drive some interest of like the environment. Like I feel like it did for you. So I wouldn't say that it's a negative on the movie. I feel like it did for you in terms of you really dug the small details about this like small town and like how it operated and stuff like that. But I just didn't. I didn't find myself caring. Is what I would say. So whilst like they're setting everything up, whilst like they're preparing everything before the vampires come in, I just didn't find myself caring about any of that. Really and truthfully.
Is it about the characters as people? Is it the setting? Is it the pacing of it? What do you think it is?
I put part the characters. They did feel a little bit CW-ish in terms of like the drama and like kind of the conflict between Eben and Stella. I kind of didn't really find myself interested. Again, like the whole like 30 Days of Night thing was like the part that I was like most interested in because we kind of spoke about this in movies like Salem's Lot and other like vampire movies where you kind of want to see a change in the town. And I don't know, I feel like I kind of went into it caring a little bit more about the increased paranoia in the town and the increased tension and the town kind of slowly getting like smaller and smaller as they're getting trapped by all these different vampires. Part of my thinking as well was that, again, I know like there's like loads of different like vampires law and like, you know, movies can pick and choose what they follow, but part of my thinking was obviously you have to let the vampires in to your home. They can't just kind of like burst in. But in here,
Not
they were
here.
just kind of like, yeah, not here. They were just kind of like bursting in everywhere. So I feel like I was just kind of like thrown for a loop a little bit of what my expectations were for what the movie was going to be and then what it played out. And I kind of just, I think throughout was just wanting the movie that was in my head and not what I was getting. And maybe it's like a viewing thing. And maybe it's like a second time, viewing it a second time with the correct expectations, I might have a different opinion on it, on the movie as a whole. But I feel like I just felt myself caring a little bit more about the setting of 30 Days of Nights and how the takeover was going to happen over the characters, over some of the rules and like operations of how like the town was working and stuff like that. And again, I felt like it was teased as well. This is like part of my problem. I felt like it was teased in the sense that they're cutting off supply to the outside world. And to me, like by the end of the movie, I was like, you didn't really need to do that. By the time everything played out the way that it did, half the town's already, not even half the town, like 3/4 or 80% of the town's already dead, and you've just got like these like few survivors that are about. And even if they did call for backup or did call for help, one, no one's going to really believe it's vampires, and two, you're luring in more people to your kind of like slaughter month basically because they have a whole month of no sunlight, so you're actually bringing in more people to feed on and to kill. So I didn't actually understand by the end of it why they went through all those efforts to cut off the outside world.
So I think there's a few aspects here. One of them is that you're correct that no help will get to them in time, right? There's no police coming. Like most of the people in the town have left. They've gone south until, to ride out the month. I think it's something like at the start of the scene, Eben kind of changes the town sign, right, the population. I think it goes to like from 500 and something to 100 and something. So like 80% of people have left. They do this every year, and the vampires know this, and they've waited for a time when as few people are there as possible so that they won't be able to put up a fight. And I think the whole thing about sabotaging the town is about preventing anybody from calling for help, right? Because the vampire lord has a bunch of lines that kind of give a little bit of an insight into their thinking, right? If not outright their motive, then at least their thinking. And one of them is that humans not believing in vampires is a conspiracy. It's vampire propaganda. And so they want to keep it this way because this way they are not being hunted, implying that there used to be a time when people were aware of vampires and being a vampire was not safe. And apparently the graphic novel that this is based on goes into a lot more detail about this. But we're talking about the movie, and the movie basically says vampires have convinced humans that they are not real. And that makes life very easy for the vampires. And they don't want to jeopardize it. And that is why they go after an isolated community where no help will come. And that is small enough that they can't put up a real fight. And because of the night, they can simply wait everybody out, right? So I do think that works, and I do think that makes sense. I don't think we need to know the entire backstory of it, just their basic mode of operation, right? Killing the guard dogs and making sure nobody can phone for help. I think all of that makes sense, right? If you think they want no loose ends. And I think that makes enough sense.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I can give the movie that.
And one thing I will agree with you about is that the characters are not that great. They're okay. They're serviceable. None of them are terribly convincing. None of them are terribly impressive. I don't care all that much about Eben or Stella or any of the others. I think they're kind of just there because we need bodies. They are serviceable, and they sell the idea of being terrified and hiding and being scared of being found out and all of that. So it is. I think the characters work. Eben and Stella specifically have a very basic story arc where they used to. I'm not sure if they were married, but they were in a relationship and they've separated, and they kind of have to deal with each other because of work, because they kind of work in the same region, and so they run into each other every once in a while. By the end of it, they've gone through hell with this, and then, they've kind of reconnected in a way, right? And then she watches him die, following his big sacrifice, and then the last shot of the movie is her kind of being furious and full of rage. I don't know if that was supposed to be sequel set up that for a movie that never happened, but like she went back to caring about him because of these experiences, and I think that works. It's nothing impressive, it's nothing spectacular, but it's okay. It does its job, I think.
For sure, like that of all like the character stuff that we get in here is probably the most like interesting part. But yeah, I feel like some of the like side characters that we got in here, I wouldn't say it's a coincidence because I feel like it's more like missed in here. But I mean, some of the side characters that we got here, like the son and the father, who end up dying, it just kind of, I don't know, it kind of felt empty. I don't think I was like part of my thing is that people didn't really have like survival skills, like real survival skills. Like people are walking down the street shouting for help whilst the town's like been taken over by vampires. It's like, do you not want to like try and be a little bit more like tactile about it? I understand like you're by yourself and you're trying to find other survivors, but like just kind of shouting for help, vampires might hear and you might die, which kind of happened to quite a few of the survivors. I actually did appreciate the movie for doing that, actually, because there were situations where I think it was like the lady in like the pink jumper who was outside asking for help, and they were like, do they go and help her or not? She ended up dying, and I think the movie was.
But that's the one who was being used as bait, right? Are we talking about the one that the vampires used as bait?
I'm trying to remember.
Because there's one where they capture somebody and basically say, we will spare you if you lure out some survivors. And then she kind of goes into the street saying, they're gone. Is there anybody else here? Please, I'm cold, right? They're like pleading for mercy. And the group kind of sees it from their attic where they've been hiding. And they kind of want to help, but they realize it has to be a trap. And then when nobody comes out, the vampires come out and she tells them, look, I'm sorry, I tried. There's nobody left. Please don't kill me. And then they kill her because they were using her as bait.
Did I remember that? Oh, I don't know why, like that whole like bait aspect of it skipped my mind. Fair. Okay, that provide that adds context.
We may not be talking about the same character, but there is an instance where that happens, where a person is being used as bait. And I think early in the beginning, when the vampires attack, people they don't immediately go to survival mode, right? They think, I don't know, it's like a gang or somebody that's attacking, right? Like they don't immediately go to, these are supernatural monsters and we have to hide. In a movie like this, you always have to kind of put yourself into the position of, this is happening in a world in which characters don't know they're in a vampire movie. And they kind of don't behave in a rational way, in the sense that they do the thing that would let them survive because they don't know what's going on, right? I didn't pick up on like unusual amounts of stupidity here, where people are basically trying to survive and trying to fight other people. But that's like in the general chaos of the vampire attack.
Because there were like a few moments where I was like, now that you've said that, I feel like I kind of like remembered that incorrectly for whatever reason. I don't know, but I definitely I remember having that feeling during the movie of, why are you doing that? Like, this is. I mean, on the father, like that was like just trying to go home. I was a bit like, it's not really going to survive anyways. Just kind of let him out. Although he might like better where you guys are. But
yeah. So I do think like you can divide it into two parts. One's the initial chaos of the vampire attack, in which case nobody knows what's going on. And then afterwards, it's the hiding from the vampires. And almost everybody has been killed already. And I actually like the vampire attack a lot. So first of all, one of the things I really hate about horror movies is when nothing happens for the first half hour and we just introduce characters, right? Who are usually not very interesting. And also, by the way, I'm not defending any of the characters in this as being interesting. They're not. They're just there to be a piece in a machine. And the really interesting part, I think, is the vampires itself. But like the vampire attack, we see that happening from the first few minutes, right? And I think at 18 minutes, they actually attack or something like that. So it doesn't take a long time. And while we are introducing the not so interesting characters and their small and their little problems, and do they want to leave? Why didn't they leave? And all of that. While that happens, we see pieces being moved into position, right? Like the guard dogs are being killed and all of that. And I think that works really quite well, where we don't waste a lot of time and we don't just fill out the runtime. We actually see the vampires doing stuff from the very beginning, and characters figuring out that at least something is up very quickly. And then the actual attack is very brutal and quick. Like when they jump through the window, grab this person, drag her out, and under kind of the space under the house, and then the husband grabs the shotgun or the rifle and tries to go after her, and he tries to not shoot her, and he tries to figure out what's going on, and like all of that happens very quickly and very abruptly, and I kind of like that. I like it when a movie just gets to the point. I think this does. I think this, like the initial vampire attack and the initial chaos happens very quickly and very intensely. And after that, it's basically cleanup, where they kill the last survivors and they play with the food a little bit before killing the last ones and all of that. So I think that stuff really works, and I think that is why, like pacing wise, I think this works really well, because we are not waiting around an hour or half an hour for the vampires to show up. It all happens very deliberately and very, very intensely, I think.
I agree with that. Only difference is just don't kill majority of the town. I know there isn't that many people left in the town anyways, but just don't kill majority of the people so quickly. Again, I don't know what kind of movie I was expecting, but
it sounds a little bit like you expected a different kind of movie. And I think if you just don't like what a movie is offering you, that's perfectly fine. But at the same time, yeah, you kind of have to like accept what the movie is. And this is like a survival movie, right? Like the actual attack is very much a slaughter. And actually, I think there are some cool scenes where the people try to fight back. There's like this overhead shot where vampires lunge at people and people fire the shotguns, and they actually kill a few of the vampire or injure them. And then another vampire comes from a different shadow and gets them, right? Like the extra sequence in which the town is taken over, in which most people die, I think is quite well done, quite well choreographed. And then like there's a scene where like this guy, is it Bo? Yeah, I think so, who initially got the ticket for having the leaky truck, runs over a bunch of vampires with his truck. I think it works. I think it's mostly interesting. But that's taste, right? Like if you just couldn't get into what this is, but that's not the movie's fault exactly. But I think you kind of have to accept that this is a survival movie, right? There's a small group of people who survive and try to make it to the end. And then they realize eventually that they can't, and then they have to come up with this other plan. But that's kind of basically what it is. It's not the entire community fighting back. It's the community being slaughtered because they had no chance in the first place. And a small group of survivors get lucky, and then they have to try to survive.
How did the town feel to you in terms of like size? Because it felt quite small to me, the town. So like again, like another thing that I had, like I was mentioning about how I just didn't understand how people were surviving. Like one of the things is it just felt like the town was like quite small, and that there wasn't really that many places where to hide that the vampire, especially with like the sheer amount of vampires that they had on their side by the end of the slaughter, it just kind of didn't really feel like there was like realistic places to kind of really be hide for as long, especially if this is like over 30 days. Like how do you survive like that long when for me anyways, the town felt quite small. And then kind of going back to like some of the stuff that's talking about like survivability, you kind of reminded me of when like the guy comes with this truck, and that's after the Olsen's trucks is flipped over and the vampires are kind of like all around the car. And then they kind of like, I don't know how they've managed to get out of the car. Obviously, he runs a few of them over, but they managed to get to the other car. It's a bit like, you're pushing it a little bit.
It is a small town to begin with. It's 500 people. 80% of them have left. The town is basically empty anyway. And then ultimately you just have like 5 survivors in the end. And that you can survive in an attic for 30 days if you manage to get some food and water. That part is not the problem.
But for me, the reason I say it is that it's because like of the amount of like zombies that they have on their side. By the end of it, you have like 30, 40, I don't know how many they had in the end, but you have so many zombies on your side. And it's a small town. It's like, especially if you're trying to get the last survivors, over the course of 30 days, you could probably scout around the rest of like the town and find the survivors. Is like kind of what I had on my mind while watching it.
And they do. And they go from house to house and they try and to find almost all of them. And the reason the small group survives is because they're hiding in this attic that's I think it's hidden. Like it's not obvious from the outside that there's an attic there. Right? And that is part of it. And then when the vampires start running out of time, they just torch the house and just try to flush out the last survivors.
Which is fair.
The topic I wanted to move on to is that I do adore the vampires in this. They're properly monstrous, feral. They behave like a pack of wolves, right? And there's a whole bunch of little details here. So one is like the strange facial features, right? They're solid black eyes. Some of them have quite inhuman features and proportions as well. They speak a fictional language, right? That sounds old and non-human, right? In some way. So they didn't just pick like an old language. Like sometimes vampires were like in shows or movies will speak like a 3,000-year-old language or something like that, right? To indicate how old they are and that they lived in antiquity and all of that. But here they just created a fictional language that just sounds old and alien. And I liked all of that. But there's a couple of things about this, about how the vampires are designed, I think really make this work. And the thing that really gets me excited about this movie is watching the vampires do their thing and interact with each other and hunt the humans and be just gloriously cruel, right? And violent and all of that. And right now we are in a time when like monstrous vampires actually are coming back, but this came out like in the middle of like the Twilight time and Underworld and stuff like that, where vampires were not monsters, right? The vampires were either the heroes or they were like completely defanged, or they were not really resembling the classical monster or a modern version of the monster at all. And I think this coming out 2007 took a lot of chances by completely going against the grain, by making them outright just a pack of wolves. And like you mentioned earlier, how almost all of the classical vampire lore, except for the sunlight, is ditched, right? I don't think garlic ever comes up. Holy crosses don't come up. Running water doesn't come up. They pretty much remove the entire mythos except for the blood, drinking the blood, and dying in sunlight. What they do instead is they are basically a pack of predators. First of all, they have a leader, but they also have a pack dynamic where they hunt together and they coordinate tactics and they isolate their prey, and they do it like they're violent with a plan. And their plan is geared towards getting their victims into a position where they can be picked off one by one when they're as harmless and as helpless as possible.
Part of my issue was that whole element of not really having like a real defense against the vampires. Kind of, it doesn't give hope to the survivors of how like they're gonna get out of the situation if you kind of like throw away like everything you know about vampires, apart from obviously like what you mentioned about drinking blood in the sunlight aspect of it. There isn't a real chance. So like the whole time you're just kind of like waiting for the survivors to really die, and I think that kind of like leads into some like the character issue. Not that it takes away agency, because I think they like tried a few things, like they tried that thing that like produced the bright light and killed the female vampire. There wasn't like a recognizable way of like them to be able to like deal with the situation that they were in, which I didn't appreciate. I know you mentioned about like the whole like design aspect of it as well. There's like parts that I liked and parts I didn't like. So I did appreciate the brutality of the vampires and like the way that they looked, the teeth and stuff like that. I think I liked that ish. I don't know. Like again, I feel like I'm kind of like of the time of when like vampires were a certain type of way. Like in Abigail, when the father comes in and he's like this like kind of like suave and he's got like the long jacket and stuff like that. And I feel like I appreciate like that vampire, and I feel like that's probably just from like explant from what I'm like used to, essentially.
You want the sophisticated aristocrat vampire.
Basically, it's kind of like is what I'm used to and what I like. And I don't know if you got the same feeling, but the brutality of it just felt like zombies. In terms of like when you look at things like The Walking Dead, or when we did like 28 Days Later and stuff like that, with like how frantic and how savage they are, it was just reminding me of that. So I just wasn't getting vampires from the movie.
Yeah, see, to me, zombies are mindless. They just keep coming and they will eventually outrun. Like the horror of zombies, like there's a few aspects to the horror of zombies. One of them is the infection, but also just the fact that they will always keep coming. Eventually, you will get tired, and they will never get tired, and you will be demoralized, and they will never be demoralized, right? So, like to me, that is kind of what makes zombies scary and what defines them. And here, they are very much intelligent, and they very much coordinate, and they're very much social, right? And we also have other stuff in here, like the henchmen, right? They have human servants who do their bidding during the day. There's this guy in the jail cell who is outright a true believer and who outright says, the vampires made me a good deal and I accepted it, and you dying is a price I'm willing to pay, right, for my reward. And that is our classic vampire thing too. Like Dracula did that with Renfield, and there's other vampires too who have this this human servant who goes where the vampire can't. And that was here too, right? So they very much have like a social aspect to it. The social aspect is both that they're a pack and they have a hierarchy and they coordinate their tactics, and the other one is that they're actually humans helping them. And they are deceiving humans. Like for instance, when they use this woman as bait, that's like a social tactic too, right? This is like using humans against each other and using human weaknesses against themselves, right? Their compassion and their desire to help, and them feeling bad for this person.
Kind of as you're explaining it, like adds a little. I think that's like some of the vampire lore that I'm like less familiar with, which is why when it's kind of like happening, I'm like not as familiar with it, or I don't like easily recognize it. But I guess for you, it's like, kind of like ticking the right boxes.
And the thing about vampires is that they are very like mix and match. It's like a buffet, right, of tropes. There's a long list of vampire tropes that you can use. You kind of just have to tell the audience what kind of vampires this is and what rules apply. And sometimes crucifixes matter, sometimes they don't. Sometimes garlic matters, sometimes it doesn't. And here, kind of we set this out, at the beginning, where we say, okay, it's blood, it's light, and they're a pack of intelligent predators, and they will use your humanity against you. That is fine. Like that, I was totally on board with that. And I guess that's taste. What kind of vampire you like? Like I like the aristocrat as well. But for me, the important part is the social predator thing, where they are smart hunters that exist in society and will use our weaknesses against us. And we kind of have to transcend our weaknesses if we want to fight them. To me, that's the interesting part about vampires. There's also a few other things I've got here. Where they don't have like a big motivation. Like they're just there to eat and to hunt and for sport. And the one rule they have is no loose ends.
One thing I was actually thinking about towards the end of the movie as well was, where were they planning to go? Especially like when it got to a point where it was like that close to sunrise in that small town, when it was kind of like getting towards like the latter parts. And I know obviously they have the rules of no loose ends, so really and truly they have to get rid of like everyone there. They have to kill everyone that's there. But I don't know. I just kind of like picture like Alaska, long miles of just like snow in either direction before you even get to anything like remotely close to shelter from sunlight. And it's not for you to answer or the movie to really answer itself. But I was like kind of like wondering. It's like towards the end, like where do they go after this? And like where's like the protection from sunlight? Getting so close towards the end.
I mean, they are in full control, right? And I think based on what the movie is telling you, it's perfectly plausible that they have just a vehicle. They just have a truck. And they came in the truck, like they have to have gotten there somehow, right? Like even during the day, right? It's totally believable that a human drove them there in a truck or in a boat or something like that. I think in the graphic novel they actually have a ship. It looks like a freight, like a small freight ship or something, or boat or something like that. But like in the cargo hold, you've got the vampires. I think that's more or less what it is. But this is like a thing that it's not a plot hole exactly, because you can just assume that they have a way of transportation, and there's no reason for why they couldn't. And I think their motive is just show up at the beginning of the long night, kill who you can, burn the town down, leave before sunrise. I think that's the extent of the plan.
Fair. I didn't picture it as a plot hole. I was just like wondering while I was watching it, like what's the escape plan for them.
One of the last things I wanted to bring up was the ending, because they basically have like the survivors have a few ideas on how to deal with the vampires. None of them really work. I think they're beginning to run out of food or something like that. So like it doesn't look like they can just wait out the 30 days. And so close to the end, they realize that when you get turned by the vampires, you retain your humanity for a little bit. You become a vampire, but your humanity sticks around for an hour or two or whatever it is. And so Eben decides to get turned on purpose so that he gets strong enough to fight the bad guy. And he wins. And then he basically commits suicide by waiting for the sunrise. Any thoughts on that? On that ending? Is that satisfying? Does it work? That doesn't make sense.
I think that might have confirmed me not liking the movie. Just because I was like, one, you're not full vampire like the head vampire was in this particular movie, and you just turned vampire. Like, I know you're like a sheriff or police officer in this small town or whatever, and you probably have some experience in fighting, but you're coming up against the main vampire and you've just turned into a vampire and you managed to kill him. I was a bit like, I really didn't like it. I really wish that they found another way. I really wish they found another way, as opposed to him turning vampire to get a little more strength to then defeat the head vampire. To me, the whole time I was like, there's just no way. Like, I was like, there's just no way. Like, you don't even know the extent of your powers. Like, you're not. And I don't know whether like, the head vampire was like full vampire and he like, and everyone else around him were. I don't know how the vampire law works and the hierarchy in vampires and like who's top vampires and like what falls beneath that. But it just didn't seem like they should be on the same level. like power scale wise at all. So completely hate that decision. And him dying at the end, like I think, kind of like neatly wrapped up their little love story that they had going on, and was a noble sacrifice on his part. Like he kind of did what he had to do to protect her and protect the remaining people. So I think it was like a really noble and honorable death that he suffered at the end. I just really hate the whole vampire fight. I completely hate that.
Yeah, I'm not gonna defend it. It's just a way to end the movie. But first of all, like, the logically, why, like you said, why does he, like, is he strong enough to win being minutes after being turned? Like, usually vampires get stronger as they get older, so the pack, or at least the pack leader, should at least be above average, right? Like, that's how you become a pack leader, right? By being the strongest. And like, it just does not make any kind of real sense. And I don't think there's even a big trick in it, where they have some kind of unique tactic or trick or something that they use to win, and the fight is kind of a distraction or something. I think that could have worked if they had set up something like this. I think it is a little bit hard to come up with a satisfying way, but I think the way you need to do it is to tie it to character, right? Like, where a character has to grow in a certain way, or has to make some big decision, or has to make some kind of sacrifice that enables them to do this, right? That will eventually win the day. And it doesn't really, like, it's not really there, right? Like, Eben, I think, it has always been kind of the nice guy who cares about other people, and now that is taken to an extreme. Like, and there's no real change there, right? There's no real hurdle to overcome, or he doesn't have to jump over his shadow. He doesn't have to grow, or he doesn't have to overcome some kind of his personal flaws or demon or something like this, right? He also doesn't have to give anything. Like, he dies in the end, right? Sure, there's a sacrifice, but this is one of those movie sacrifices that doesn't mean much, because he's a fictional character and the movie's over anyway. So what is he sacrificing, right? Like, as a person, he's sacrificing himself, but I don't know. Like, none of, like, that sort of thing has never really made me care, because I was going to say goodbye to this character at that point anyway, right? So nothing happens afterwards that is different because of this choice.
I mean, you kind of said that there wasn't a sequel after this, because I kind of would have thought that it would have like hardened like her to like become like a vampire hunter, and to kind of like flip the script and become the one that like starts to seek out the vampires and stuff like that. But like I said, if this is like a one and done, I get the whole sad ending. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, I was just saying, I just said earlier, like, her looks like set up for something, right? Like, she's like you said, like, she goes on some big revenge, and I want to see 30 Nights of Day, like, in 6 months later, where the sun doesn't set for 30 days. The vampire have to hide from a vampire hunter. I want to see that movie. And I'm sure there's like a movie that's a little bit like this somewhere, but like, I like symmetry in stuff like this and in stories, and somebody should do that. But it's very superficial in the sense that it's meant, like, if you just look at it on the surface, and if you at this point you got to buy into these characters, you feel for them, right? And you feel for her, having to watch the man she loves die, right? On some level, it's tragic, but as a story, it's not much there, right? Like, it's just too free of consequence, and we don't see, like, nothing interesting happens because of it, because the movie's over anyway.
Hard to disagree on that. Again, I can see why they would want to like try to evoke some type of emotion from the audience with that particular scene, but like you said, it just doesn't have like the right components or the right pieces to really hit.
Yeah, and I find it hard to care because I've seen other movies. I know those beats, and in order for a movie to get me to care, there has to be a consequence, right? There has to be something, like, if this happens earlier in the movie, and this is very much the end, right? Like, this shouldn't happen in the middle of the movie, but like a sacrifice like this is interesting because of its aftermath and because of its consequences on other characters and stuff like this, right? Because it's a fictional character, they're a tool in the story anyway. So somebody sacrificing themselves just by itself is not all that interesting, I don't think. I think the ending by itself is a little bit weaker, and I think the movie would have needed to set something up in the beginning, or like in the middle of the movie, so that this whole thing about, it takes a while for like your humanity to fade, that is set up earlier, right? They watched this happen early on, but I don't think that's enough. because that's very much because the writer said so, right? There's no human aspect to it, I think.
No, I agree.
So just overall, I think the bottom line for me with this movie is I really like the setting, I like the mood, I like the vibes of it, I like the action, I like the vampire violence, the vampires doing vampire things, and the characters and the ending are kind of there. Like they're not the main attraction. They're just there because the movie has to end somehow. But it's not the strong point of the movie, I don't think. But I think as a whole, it does with vampires what I want them to do. And it makes the setting matter, it makes the details matter. These are not generic characters. The movie never forgets where we are, right? The location, all of that. So that's why I think I like this movie so much, and why so many people like this movie, and why it stuck around. So, like, what's your bottom line? Is this one that it doesn't sound like this is one that goes on the shelf, right? Like, even after this conversation, you're just not vibing with it?
No, this is just one that's just not for me. And not to say that it's a bad movie, because I think it's got the right components there. And for certain people that are a little bit more locked in with the whole like vampire lore and vampire stories, it probably hit you a little bit differently than it hit me. I didn't find a hook. There was like nothing in this movie that really hooked me to kind of really want to watch it, really want to enjoy it. It was quite forgettable, I would say as well. Maybe it was just wrong expectations. It's kind of how I'll conclude. I was kind of like being set up in the movie to kind of go in one direction, and it went a complete other direction, and I just could never catch up to where that car was heading, and I was just kind of like left behind, not really satisfied with some of the journey that I was like going on in this movie. So I think this one's a bit of a miss for me. Not one that I'd even return to.
Do you think you could have benefited from some spoilers? If I told you what kind of movie this was and what to expect, would you have enjoyed it more?
I don't think so. Because even as like things were happening, and even like as the action was unfolding, I don't think I was like I don't think I cared that much. So I think even with the spoilers, hard to say that I would have enjoyed it.
If these weren't vampires, if they were called something else, would you have enjoyed it more?
Do you know what part of the problem is? I also had like From in my head, where they're like locked in a certain locations with these monsters, can't escape at night. You make a mistake and you're punished for it basically by dying. And there is like almost that like social element of it, where like the monsters outside are trying to like trick you to like opening your door and letting them in basically. So part of that was in my mind in the early setup of the movie. I was like, oh, it's going to be like like this TV show that I really like, and it just didn't turn out that way. And it's hard to say that if it wasn't vampires I would have enjoyed it a little bit more or whatever. I don't know. I genuinely, I don't think so. Like, I would say I probably lean more towards it is just not a movie for me, or like there isn't enough in there for me to like really get on board with the movie.
And that's fair enough. Like, sometimes a movie can do everything right on its own merits, and you're just not there. You're just not buying what it's selling.
Yeah, exactly. It could even just be a case of like when I watched it. Like, it could be so many factors. It could have just been like when I watched it and I just wasn't. Like I think you say it quite a few times, where you just wasn't in the mood for a particular movie, or you wasn't in the mindset for a particular movie, and then like you say like years later you watch it again and you just have a complete different reaction to it. That could also be part of it as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about this movie again next year, next October, and then we'll see if you have the correct response to it.
See you guys again next year when we redo this, so that I can give the proper analysis, or give the correct analysis.
And the reviews will continue until you like this movie.
Every October. So stay tuned every October for every single review of 30 Days of Night until I finally like it.
I set a reminder for it. All right, any other last words about 30 Days of Night?
No, all good. Wrap up. All right, guys. I guess that's all we've got for you today. If you reach this part of the episode, we appreciate the support. We appreciate you rocking with us, checking us out. As always, if you liked what you heard and you enjoyed our discussion, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Average Podcast. See you later.
Bye-bye.